And can be enabled using the CC button in YouTube. I'm Darren Burba, the Chief Information Officer. The role of my organization is to support the technology needs of the amazing and broad mission of the Smithsonian. With partners in our museums and departments across the institution, we created the Transcription Center. The focus of the effort quickly shifted from the platform we had created to the amazing engagement from digital volunteers that work with the collections and make them more searchable and accessible for everyone. Volunteer efforts have led to countless research and genealogical discoveries, fostered personal connections, linked globally dispersed data, and enhanced many thousands of collection records. As we've all become more digitally engaged over the past few years, our community has grown tremendously, with new transcription volunteers from over 700 K-12 schools and colleges worldwide. Corporations organizing volunteer groups are another great addition to the transcribing community that has helped get us to the milestone we are celebrating today. Today's celebration is really about the impact and accomplishments of our volunteers. As part of today's program, you will hear from Smithsonian staff about projects you have supported. I would also like to thank them and all the staff who have worked to bring our collections and archives to the Transcription Center. But before we begin the presentations, it's my honor to introduce someone we are very fortunate to have as the Secretary of the Smithsonian, Lonnie G. Bunch III. He's the 14th Secretary of the Smithsonian and assumed his position June 16, 2019. As Secretary, he oversees 21 museums, 21 libraries, the National Zoo, numerous research centers, as well as several education units. Two of the 21 museums, the National Museum of the American Latino and the Smithsonian American Women's History Museum, are in development. Lonnie was the founding director of the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture and is the first historian to be Secretary of the institution. In 2021, he received France's highest award, the Legion of Honor. Secretary Bunch, thank you for being here today, and I turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you for that great introduction. And thanks to all of you for joining us for this recognition of an incredible milestone. 1 million pages transcribed by our dedicated Smithsonian Transcription Center volunteers. It shows how much you believe in the Smithsonian. You are truly some of the Smithsonian's unsung heroes. On behalf of the institution, let me thank you all for remaining engaged with us during the past 2 years. It's been a difficult time for all, but I hope the work you've done has been as meaningful for you as it has been for us. The Smithsonian has always been an institution steeped in scholarship and research. I know from personal experience how painstaking, how deliberate, how time-consuming the process is. At the National Air and Space Museum, at the American History Museum, and at the African American History Museum, and now as Secretary, I have seen that the institution is at its best when we marry expert scholarship, rigorous investigation, and robust creativity. And the work you do all 63,000 plus of you helps to make that possible. To be candid, I am as impressed with the number 63,000 as I am with 1 million. You are a testament to the power of people united in a single goal, in this case, to help us increase and diffuse knowledge. When you transcribe and review our collections to make them more readily searchable, you tap into their potential. In a digital age, information is only valuable if you can find it in the vast oceans of data in which we are all immersed. Your work enables that. You amplify the work of Smithsonian archivists, libraries, and collection staff. Your efforts enhance the catalog information and help lead to new discoveries and global data connections. As the institution's largest digital volunteering and crowdsourcing platform, the Transcription Center is ahead of the curve. Since 2013, you have set the standard for what museums can do and must do. This means not only maximizing our technological capabilities, but also strengthening the connections we have to people all over the country and the world. I was so amazed when I heard that someone in Ireland was working to transcribe the Freedmen's Bureau papers, but I guess I shouldn't have been, because the Transcription Center is first and foremost a community, one that comprises people who understand the value of fully unleashing the power of the Smithsonian collections. You know, there's never been more apparent than during the pandemic. When we had to close our museum doors, engagement with the Transcription Center increased by more than 1,200% in less than a year. So many of you have told us how this work is a way to give back and connect when opportunities to volunteer in person were limited. I am particularly enthusiastic about the educational reach of the Transcription Center. During 2020 and 2021, students from more than 700 K-12 schools and colleges worldwide participated on the site. Transcription is a powerful tool for primary source literacy. It is gratifying that so many students and educators are turning to the Transcription Center for extensive firsthand knowledge from the repositories that we have of history, art, culture, and science. By bringing together the breadth of our collections and archival material, anyone with an internet connection can make unexpected connections to satisfy their own curiosity, all while helping us fulfill our mission. The center's largest ongoing transcription project, the Freedmen's Bureau paper, resonated personally. I have located some of my own ancestors from North Carolina in these poignant documents detailing formerly enslaved people. While researching my ancestors, I had gone to the National Archives in search of more information about Candace, an enslaved woman whose name I had previously discovered on a marriage license. In a breakthrough at the archives, I found mention of her death in 1870 as a 40-year-old newly freed woman in Wake County, North Carolina. After that discovery, I nearly gave up. But then in the records of the Freedmen's Bureau, I unearthed a labor contract between her and a landowner. She received $11 for 44 days of farm work in 1867 and purchased items such as starch and seed cotton from the landowner. In that list of items was also a remarkable connection between Candace's life and my own. For 60 cents, she brought 2 baking tins, one heart shape and another crescent shape. As a child, my grandmother used to make heart and crescent-shaped cookies. I'm still astonished and touched by the memory of that serendipitous moment. At the Transcription Center, you help enable those kinds of profound discoveries. You make it possible to transcend space and time to connect on a personal level with long-lost relatives and to connect with information that will make us all better. So I thank you for giving that gift and for everything you do on the Smithsonian's behalf. We are in your debt. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Bunch. I'm Caitlin Haynes, the Transcription Center's program manager. And I've got some wonderful questions for you that were submitted by our Smithsonian community and some of our digital volunteers, or volunteers, of course, as we call them, including two of our longest serving and most dedicated contributors, Beth Graham and Chuck Marshall, who combined have transcribed and reviewed over 30,000 pages, many of which are from the Freedmen's Bureau Project. So are you ready to dive in?
I follow your lead.
Awesome. So you may have already kind of answered this question since you've discovered your own ancestors in the records. But in your opinion, what have been the most thrilling or the most unexpected discoveries that we've made in Transcription Center?
Well, obviously, the connection with my own ancestors meant a lot to me personally. But another unexpected discovery was really when I became secretary. The first trip I took was to visit the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory. And there I saw and learned about the collection of 500,000 glass photographic plates that charted the galaxy in the early days of astronomy. And most importantly, I learned of the unheralded women known as computers who did that scientific work. And I was so excited that the Smithsonian Transcription Center is collaborating with the Astronomical Photographic Plate Collection to digitize and transcribe the logbooks and the research notes that accompany these plates. So for me, this is really an opportunity to enrich what the Smithsonian does, to make it accessible, and to help people find new meaning in old material.
Absolutely. And we're going to get to hear even more about those glass plates as we kind of continue on with our presentation today. So that's great kind of foreshadowing for us. So our second question is, how does digital engagement in the Transcription Center and the work of its volunteers further the mission of the Smithsonian?
One of the things we've learned is that the Smithsonian, as wonderful it is, doesn't have broad enough shoulders to do everything. And that in some ways, the work of the volunteers allows the Smithsonian to fulfill its mission, to take on new ideas and to make things accessible. One of the things that's clear to me is that for the Smithsonian to have success for the next several generations, it has to become more technologically adept. And I think the Transcription Center is allowing us to do that, both in the way that they make direct connections with people and allow people to sort of use the Transcription Center and the work they do as part of their own lifelong learning. But also you do this in the scholarship and the education that you enable by making the knowledge we amassed more accessible to others. So in some ways, the Transcription Center and the work of the volunteers is really at the heart of what the Smithsonian wants to do, which is make accessible what was once inaccessible and to give people an opportunity to dip into the reservoir of knowledge that may not have been accessible to them in the past.
Absolutely. Yeah, we really are learning something new every day. And that is in large part, if not entirely, because of our digital volunteers. So thank you for that. So here's one more question. This one comes from Chuck Marshall, who's transcribed over 10,000 pages himself. So with the great increase in transcription during the pandemic, which many of our long-term volunteers definitely noticed, he says, I don't know how the staff keep up with the deluge. We don't either. They do an excellent job, thank you, Chuck, and are a real asset to the institution. Is it possible to direct more contributions to the center? And I promise we did not plant this question for Chuck.
Well, I agree that my colleagues in the Transcription Center are spectacular, and we at the whole Smithsonian are indebted to them. I think it's also important that as we are now reimagining what the Smithsonian is and how to sort of integrate the sort of innovations of technology with the traditional work we do, we're really looking at how do we engage more donors, how do we provide more support. So I continue to work on this and talk to my development staff to make sure that we do this. But absolutely, the success you demonstrate is part of the way we can make an argument for more resources.
Awesome, thanks. And we love our advancement and development teams and work with them often as well. So we are indebted to them too. So as a historian yourself, what are some tips for transcribing historical documents? We know we have transcribed with you, and you have helped us out in deciphering some of these Freedmen's Bureau documents, but also many other documents from the 20th century and 19th century. So what are your tips?
Well, I always think that part of what allows you to sort of work through transcribing historical documents is, first of all, the power that you get from learning, the kind of things that those documents tell you in ways that you might not have thought about. And I think that excitement combined with patience, thoroughness, and persistence is really the key for transcribing historical documents. And the other thing I learned when I first started reading 19th century documents is it's okay to take a break every now and
Yes.
then.
Absolutely. Sometimes we all just need to zoom out, literally and figuratively, and step away for a second. That handwriting can be hard.
Well, what it does is when you read documents, especially 19th century, you realize your handwriting personally isn't as bad as you once thought. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, we actually get feedback from volunteers all the time saying that they hope they'll be an asset to Transcription Center because they're nurses or doctors or pharmacists and have to deal with that kind of crazy handwriting all the time. And we are extremely excited to hear that because we will definitely benefit from those skills.
I think that's so powerful because, the only F I ever received in elementary school was handwriting, right? So I love when I began to read 19th century handwriting and 18th century and say, boy, people write worse than me. I should write that teacher and say, give me at least a C.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating to sort of read through what I like to call some of this chicken scratch that we have in these records. But it's incredible when you actually decipher it, very satisfying. So as we talk about Freedmen's Bureau, we know that you have kind of a special connection, not only personally, but as the founding director of the National Museum of African American History and Culture. How has the work of transcribers on the Freedmen's Bureau project specifically advanced historians' understanding of the period of Reconstruction?
This is a great example of what the Transcription Center can do and what our volunteers help us. In some ways, the Freedmen's Bureau is really the untapped resource that helps us understand the transition from slavery to freedom for all Southerners, white and Black Southerners as well. And because it's so untapped and because it's so personal, that suddenly by making this accessible and searchable, you're able to find family names or find communities that shaped you. So in a way, it's both an opportunity for people to humanize Reconstruction, humanize that period of transition from slavery to freedom. But it also is really helping scholars because those documents were hard to access. They weren't sort of organized in a way that made it really easy for researchers and scholars. So what you're doing is you're sort of ripping off the veil that has kept so many people from understanding Reconstruction through those papers. So it is really something that will help people that are interested in their own families, help scholars, and help us understand a period when the United States felt that it was going to become a fundamentally different place. So the lessons from that continue to shape who we are today.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are in the DC area, are able to make it here this summer, I highly recommend going to the National Museum of African American History and Culture and all of our museums. But there is currently a new temporary exhibition on Reconstruction called Make Good the Promises that features a lot of documents from the Freedmen's Bureau itself. So check that out. So I think that's all the time we have today for questions. Thank you so much, Secretary Bunch, for taking the time to speak with us today. Do you have any final thoughts to share with our volunteer community before we say goodbye?
I think it's just important, one, for me to thank my colleagues that work in a transcription center. All of you have done great work, and especially to thank the volunteers because this is really about making visible what has often been invisible, making accessible these important work that really is at the heart of the Smithsonian's collections and work. So what you're really doing is both building a foundation of the new Smithsonian, a Smithsonian that is more nimble, that embraces the availability of technology, but also what you're allowing us to remember first and foremost is that the Smithsonian is this amazing cache of education and that we're all learning as the work you transcribe makes it accessible, and we're all made better by that. So I just want to thank you very much and appreciate all that you do. I just wish I had more time to be a historian.
Absolutely. Hey, we always say we wish we could just spend more time transcribing ourselves. But there's never enough time to do all the things we want to do. But thank you, Secretary Bunch, so much. And now we are going to turn things over to our Transcription Center Community Manager, Emily Kane.
Wow, thank you both so much for that thoughtful and energizing conversation. And thank you again to those of you who are joining us from home or work or school right now. Over the past 9 years, over 63,000 of you have worked together from all over the world to transcribe over 1 million pages in over 26 different languages from across the Smithsonian Institution. You've touched on nearly all aspects of the Smithsonian's collections, ranging from over 50,000 banknotes and coins at the National Numismatic Collection to over 52,000 botanical specimen sheets at the National Museum of Natural History to orations by Frederick Douglass at the Anacostia Community Museum archives. We'll be hearing a lot today about the collections that you've made a difference for. Handwritten materials you've made more accessible through text searchability, the data you've extracted from specimen cards to improve our catalog records, the historic audio recordings you've captioned. But to me, the triumph of this community is that you've amplified the stories told through these materials by making the information more available to researchers, educators, and curious learners everywhere. We constantly hear from volunteers of all ages, from high school students to retirees, that transcribing has totally changed your perspective on our shared history. But it's important to let you know that you have revolutionized our understanding of our own collections, and you've unlocked that transformative learning experience for anyone with an internet connection. You've identified the subjects of archival photos using the geographic and historical knowledge you gained from transcribing expeditionary diaries. You've illuminated the work of previously unacknowledged women scientists by developing expertise on their handwriting. You've discovered your own ancestors in the records, and by making these materials text searchable, you make that experience possible for other genealogists as well. But most importantly, you've shared these discoveries with us, and you've made this emerging knowledge available to the world. To all of our digital volunteers, your dedication, insight, and attention to detail are invaluable to the Smithsonian's mission. Whether you've transcribed a single page or thousands, your contribution has an immediate impact, and we are incredibly grateful. Every single day, this community is working hard to increase and diffuse knowledge on a massive scale, and today's celebration is our love letter to you. So let's dive into what 1 million pages transcribed really means. Today we'll be learning about 7 different projects from the collections and archives professionals who steward the materials you've transcribed. Let's start with the Field Book Project, one of the earliest collections of materials in the Transcription Center, which has informed our understanding of our own institutional history while also furthering scientific knowledge and research. Please welcome Rick Ferrante, Director of Digital Services at Smithsonian Libraries and Archives, who's here to tell us more.
I love how you presented this idea. This is our love letter to our volunteers, because it has been such a thrill to be in on the ground floor with the Fieldbook Project. To give some context about the Fieldbook Project, it is a effort to expose what in the archives world can be hidden collections, in this case of field journals of naturalists and scientists from the 19th and early 20th century, of biodiversity material, much of which is now part of the Smithsonian's collections. These efforts were work that they conducted all over the world, China, Malaysia, the United States, Canada, what was the North American territory of Russia at one point in time, literally all around the world. In 2011, we were able to launch what is considered a typical library catalog, of those field notes with basic descriptions, which instantly turned into a question from the people who were accessing that catalog. Do you have a transcript of this? Because so much of that material, as you can see in the slide, was handwritten. And some of it was handwritten while on horseback, and not very legible at all, meaning that machine technology, digital technology, had a very difficult time producing things automatically that would be transcripts of this material. It required people to do this work. So we got in on the ground floor of the Transcription Center. It was a great way to try and make this more accessible. Buried in these documents is not only the scientific names and locations where these specimens were observed and picked up, but also in most cases, there's a narrative of the expedition that those individuals were on and what the conditions were as they discovered things, and even what they did in their time off at camp. The information that is buried in these objects really helped us understand more of the context and actually some of the social dynamic present at the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century. In one example, Joseph Rose at the Natural History Museum kept a catalog of specimens sent in to the U.S. National Herbarium. And at the time, the convention was that women were known by their husband's name. And so there were multiple specimens noted as coming from D.D. Galliard in Panama when the canal zone was being constructed. And through the work of our volunteers, we were able to determine which of those specimens were actually collected by Colonel Galliard's wife, Catherine Ross, is her maiden name. This kind of disambiguation is just absolutely wonderful and useful in better understanding the collections that we have. We discovered the community of volunteers at this point in time. I really want to mention that when we entered in, we discovered that the people who were coming to transcribe were looking for each other to team up and to work and discuss the material that they found in the Transcription Center on their own. And a community kind of formed itself in Twitter and welcomed us as we joined in on that. And that's really where we got the idea of the tag volunteers, because that really is the peer relationship. We've made discoveries with you. Well, we have a tagline, we learn together, and that truly is what you have made possible. Next. So in terms of the fieldbook project, over 571 field books have been transcribed. That's over 47,000 pages. The catalog itself is 9,508 field books, so we only have 8,937 more to go. I look forward to continuing the journey with you.
So, transcribed field books are an incredible resource for scientific research, but they only provide one piece of the puzzle. The Smithsonian holds millions of scientific and archaeological specimens in its collections, only a portion of which are available online. Digital volunteers have helped change that, transcribing over 100,000 handwritten specimen labels from Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute and the National Museum of Natural History. Jessica Bird, Museum Specialist in Natural History's Entomology Department, is here to tell us more about the impact of volunteer transcription on one of their largest collections.
Thanks, Caitlin. Back in 2014, our Entomology Department and the Digitization Program Office teamed up for Natural History's first rapid capture pilot project. So our goal in this was to create a workflow that would increase the rate of digitization for pinned insects. We chose our bumblebee collection due to their charismatic nature and their importance as pollinators. Then in 2019, we were able to revisit this project. We completed the bumblebee collection, and we also were able to digitize the entire carpenter bee collection. In total, 75,000 bees were digitized in just 72 days. So there's several challenges that we face when digitizing entomology collections. One is just the sheer size of our collection. We have over 35 million objects, and with that, it would take a dedicated team of 20 people 67 years to digitize every single one. Another challenge is how entomology specimens are stored. As you can see in the slide, there's multiple preservation methods, but the most prominent is a pinned insect. And that just means that the insect is stored dry with a pen through it, and then labels are penned directly underneath. Those labels are what contain all of the important data regarding each individual bee. And that data is what we often refer to as dark data, which just means that you can't access it unless you physically come to our collection. So when creating this workflow, we made it into 3 parts, and that consisted of specimen handling, imaging, and data processing. The physical and the imaging workflows worked as part of an assembly line. And so that is where the specimen labels were removed from the pen and arranged on a custom stage with the bee positioned. We also added a unique identifier. Next slide, please. And then we were able to capture the image in just one shot. Finally, the labels were placed back on the pen, and we kept the original order. And then we placed them back into the collection, making sure to freeze them to control for pests. We used those images that were captured to create very basic catalog records so that they could immediately be made public. Then we sent these images into batches to the Smithsonian Transcription Center. And with your help, every single label from the 45,000 bees captured in the 2014 project was transcribed, either verbatim or into the correct field. Data that was captured included the collector, location, and the collection date. And this is where we really unlocked that dark data and made it discoverable online. You all transcribed 45,000 pages, which was easily over 100,000 insect labels. And I really need to emphasize the work that this took. Reading entomology labels isn't easy, and each collector can have their own style. It was really neat to see how you all learned the handwriting of particular collectors and really made this project your own. You all even showed me a better way to represent our date ranges in our public database, and I still use that method today. It took over a year to complete this project, and we held contests and did giveaways, but really you all motivated each other, and the results were just phenomenal. We now have over 75 images and associated data published online, and the majority of these are even open access, which we take great pride in. One question I'm often asked is, how will this data be used? The possibilities are really endless. With the data online, scientists can download it without a trip to our collection, and it also helps our department because we end up processing fewer loans. A few months ago, one of our images was even used to confirm a data discrepancy after someone noticed an outlier in a previous data set. And then one of the coolest projects to come out of this was a deep learning experiment. I'm obviously not going to do the project justice in the short time, but they were able to use our large batch of images to analyze the bee features and identify bumblebees to species with great accuracy. In every presentation, I like to list out all of the people that made this project possible because it was just a huge team effort. As you can see, it took a lot of people at every step of the way, but we truly would not have been successful without the dedication of the digital volunteers in the Transcription Center. And with that, I just want to say thank you. I really enjoyed working with you all on this project, and hopefully we will be able to add more projects in the future.
Thank you, Jessica, for sharing how our digital volunteer community has helped to enrich our understanding of biodiversity on our own planet. The work of our volunteers has opened up worlds beyond ours as well, helping to unlock the histories of air and space, from early ballooning to the work of NASA, including the personal papers of Sally Ride. Transcribed diaries have helped National Air and Space Museum curators prepare for exhibitions, and transcribed Apollo stowage lists have been used by NASA scientists to plan for upcoming space flights. Katie Fry, Assistant Head Librarian at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, is here to tell us more about the work of women computers transcribed through Project Phaedra.
Thank you, Emily. Project Phaedra began at the Smithsonian Transcription Center in 2017. It is a collection of over 2,500 notebooks, most of them written between the mid-1800s and the 1930s. What makes these notebooks really interesting is that many of them are written by computers. And I don't mean computers like the device you're using to see and listen to this presentation, but as alluded by Secretary Bunch earlier, computer was a title or job description for people who did computational work. And frequently, the people hired for the position of computer were women. And indeed, the majority of the Phaedra collection was written by women computers, or as they would be more properly called today, astronomers. Over 80 women worked in this capacity at the Harvard College Observatory from the 1880s to the mid-1900s. Their task was to examine an ever-growing collection of glass plate photographs of the night sky and begin to make sense of the universe. Featured in our collection at the Smithsonian Transcription Center, we have research workbooks written by Wilhelmina Fleming. Next slide, please. A Scottish immigrant and single mother who was putting her son through college. While working at the observatory, Fleming discovered 310 variable stars, 10 stellar nova, 59 nebula, including the famous Horsehead Nebula. As seen in this video, the Horsehead Nebula is just a tiny speck found in the constellation of Orion, and on the glass plates that Fleming examined, it was only visible as a small semicircular indentation. Beyond those accomplishments, Fleming also managed the observatory publications and was the first woman to hold a professional appointment at Harvard when she became the curator of astronomical photographs. We also have research workbooks written by Annie Jump Cannon, a deaf astronomer who primarily focused on examining the spectra of stars, working to discover how stars were different from and similar to each other. Her work classifying stars by their spectral type formed the basis of the HR diagram as shown here, which describes our current understanding of stellar evolution. And we have notebooks written by Cecilia Payne, a young woman who left her home in England to pursue her passion for astronomy by studying at the Harvard Observatory. Her advisors were so impressed by her talent and potential that when they realized that the Department of Physics would only grant PhDs to men, they created the Department of Astronomy in order to award her a well-deserved doctoral degree. In her thesis, Payne shared her discovery that stars are made up of mostly hydrogen and helium, which was a revolutionary concept at the time. These three women and their colleagues at the observatory were famous during their day. Newspaper articles were written about their work, and their discoveries would make front-page news. Unfortunately, many of the details of their work and their research and life haven't really been captured in general historical records. But in these notebooks collected at the Transcription Center, we are able to bring their methodologies, their calculations, and their thought processes to life. As you can see in the next slide, these were working documents. These women worked with each other to double-check their research, and sometimes whole pages had to be discarded once they realized there was an error made during their quest to understand the stars. Volunteers who transcribe the research notebooks are crucial for enabling modern astronomers and historians to search the full breadth and depth of these women's work. When someone searches the astronomical archives for Fleming, Payne, Leland, Sawyer, Cannon, or any of these other women, they won't just find mentions of them in publications that they weren't allowed to author themselves. Even more than that, they'll find the work and the astronomical research that these women conducted in order to lay the foundations for modern astronomy. If you're interested in learning more about Project Phaedra, We hold monthly office hours on the second Tuesday of each month. They consist of a short presentation related to the women astronomers or the observatory. They're followed by a Q&A session for our transcription project. This month, we're holding the second in a book club series discussing Hidden Figures by Margot Lee Shetterly. If you've read the book or seen the movie or are interested in learning more about women in space, please join us. And thank you for all of the amazing transcripts of our Project Phaedra notebooks.
Thank you, Katie. One of the things that makes Transcription Center so impactful is that it allows us to deeply engage with history. From the journals of gold rush miners to girlhood diaries, from anti-slavery publications to love letters and materials from hip-hop's earliest artists, collections from across the Smithsonian have allowed us to step back in time and experience the past through the words of those who lived it. The Freedmen's Bureau records, as we've heard from Secretary Bunch, provide an unparalleled glimpse into the lives of Americans during an era of immense change and possibility. Camila Stinnett, Museum Specialist at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, is here to tell us more. Camila?
Thanks, Caitlin. The National Museum of African American History and Culture launched our Freedmen's Bureau transcription project in 2016 with the goal of transcribing 1.7 million records from the Freedmen's Bureau. And thanks to the efforts of thousands of volunteers, we've made many meaningful discoveries in the 350,000 records that you've transcribed so far. The Freedmen's Bureau, also known as the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, was established by Congress in 1865 as an effort to aid newly freed African Americans in their transition to freedom and to aid in the Reconstruction of the South following the Civil War. The Bureau operated in all 15 southern and border states, including the District of Columbia, and the records contain names and information of thousands of formerly enslaved African Americans. This, of course, includes some very well-known figures in American history. People like Harriet Tubman, who's mentioned in Freedmen's Bureau records from South Carolina. It also includes people like Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth, who are both mentioned in records in the Bureau from Washington, D.C. But the beauty of the project is that it allows us to find information about African American figures who are not as well known or well documented. Millie Christine McCoy were conjoined twins who were born enslaved in North Carolina. They, because of their condition, were exhibited around the United States and Europe as a sideshow act during slavery. However, after emancipation, their enslaver refused to free them. And so their parents, Jacob and Monimia McCoy, went to the Freedmen's Bureau to get help getting custody of their 14-year-old daughters. The twins were fairly well known at the time and even authored an autobiography once they became adults, but the autobiography doesn't mention the custody battle that plays out in the Freedmen's Bureau records. Unfortunately, the Bureau ruled in favor of their enslaver, but the twins maintained a very close connection with their parents and their siblings until they passed away in 1912. Our museum has several images of the twins in our collection, and we've been able to curate an exhibition about the twins, their lives, and their experiences as a result of the project. The Bureau records, as you've seen, provide more than just names. They also offer a unique view into the lives of African Americans and their communities in the post-emancipation South. By transcribing these records, you've helped us learn about free communities like this one in Henderson, North Carolina, who in 1868, members of the community requested that the Bureau provide funding so they could continue building the school for their children in the community. They needed additional funds to complete building the floor and the windows so that their children would be able to learn safely during the winter months. And letters like this one from Solomon Moss also serve as an example of the important genealogical information that the Freedmen's Bureau records contain. In 1867, Solomon Moss asked the Bureau to transport him to Indiana so that he would be reunited with his family. In his letter, he reveals a great deal of information about his wife, his children, and their lives during enslavement. He states that at some point, his family was sold to a different enslaving family and later taken to Indiana to be emancipated. He, however, was forced to remain enslaved in North Carolina. These are just a few examples of the types of rich stories contained in the records. So whether you've transcribed one record or thousands of records, we thank you and are grateful for your contributions. And if you have yet to participate in the transcription project, we hope that you'll join us as we continue transcribing the Freedmen's Bureau.
Thank you, Camila. The Freedmen's Bureau records are a powerful reminder of the responsibility to make the full scope of our history more visible. Our digital volunteer community has amplified the voices of activists through transcription of materials ranging from early NAACP publications to the records of the National Congress of American Indians. When it comes to the cultural materials we steward here at the Smithsonian, the records of early anthropologists and collectors can help us better illuminate colonial histories and empower community-driven work today. Maria Galban, Collections Documentation Manager for the National Museum of the American Indian, is up next to tell us more about this crucial work.
Thank you, Emily. Since 2010, the National Museum of the American Indian has been working on a provenance research project to better understand how objects in our collection were acquired. Provenance is the origin and record of ownership of an object. And over the last century, many of the archival records associated with our collections have become disconnected from our objects. We've been working hard to reconnect these records to learn more about our collection, as well as the circumstances in which they were collected. Much of our collection was inherited from the Museum of the American Indian in New York City, founded by George High in 1916. Although High began collecting Native American material for his personal collection in 1897. George High and later the MAI collected items through various means, including archaeological expeditions, field collecting expeditions to indigenous communities, gifts from donors, as well as purchasing items from collectors and antiquities dealers. Researching items that were purchased from dealers is particularly difficult and can often lead to a dead end. Luckily, during our investigation into a British dealer named William Ockerford Oldman, our research led us to an archive on the other side of the world, and ultimately to a unique opportunity for a collaborative transcription project. William Oldman was a dealer and collector based in London in the early 20th century. He sold ethnological and archaeological objects to institutions and collectors around the world. This included European arms and armor, as well as African, Asian, and Native American art. He dealt extensively with the Museum of the American Indian and sold a variety of Native American objects to George High and the museum between 1909 and 1937. Oldman was also a collector of oceanic art, and he ultimately sold his personal collection to the government of New Zealand in 1948. This sale also included all of Oldman's business records, which now reside in the archives at the Museum of New Zealand, Te Papa Tongarewa. Working with Te Papa archive staff, we were able to get scans of some of Oldman's sale registers, and it became immediately clear that they would help us identify items in our collections purchased from Oldman. Importantly, they could also give us more context as to how Native American items made it overseas in the first place, since Oldman's records contain detailed information about his transactions, including the names of original sources for objects that he acquired and sold. However, there are multiple handwritten ledgers, and reading through them would be tedious. Plus, they were halfway across the world in New Zealand. Luckily, both NMAI and Te Papa realized the benefit of digitizing this information, not only for our own collections, but for other museums around the world that also hold items acquired from Oldman. In 2018, Te Papa digitized 7 Oldman ledgers and worked with us to get them published on the Smithsonian Transcription Center. Between 2019 and 2020, 215 volunteers from around the world transcribed 1,700 pages of these ledgers. Now this information can be downloaded and searched and is accessible to museums and researchers around the world. Because of the work of the Transcription Center volunteers, we have now been able to positively match 600 objects in our collection acquired before 1919 from Oldman. We continue to research another 700 objects we also believe came from Oldman. These ledgers have provided us with new data on previous owners and sellers of material to give us further leads for research by identifying the collectors that worked with Oldman. The full impact of this project still remains to be seen. As our research continues and more collectors are identified, we may continue to find more connections between Oldman and our collection. Having this transcribed resource at our fingertips has made this possible. This was also the first collaborative transcription project the National Museum of the American Indian has undertaken. We hope to continue our collaboration with Te Papa for additional Oldman materials, as well as look towards other institutions that may also hold valuable resources. And we thank all of our transcription volunteers that contributed to make this project successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for sharing more about how transcription can help us unlock history and learn. Thank you, Maria, for sharing more about how transcription can help us unlock history and learn more about our cultural heritage. Listening to historic audio recordings can be even more powerful for connecting with our past. We've transcribed captions for over 450 hours of audio since launching sound transcription in 2019, helping to preserve these fragile collections and improve their accessibility. We've heard the voices of civil rights activists Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker, listened to the stories of 20th century Arab American immigrants, and played interviews with artists like Kehinde Wiley and Ansel Adams. Dave Walker, audiovisual archivist at the Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, is here to tell us more about the importance of transcribing their richly diverse audio collections.
Hello, thank you very much, Caitlin. Today I'd like to share a little bit about some exciting Transcription Center projects we plan to publish soon, coming from the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage. The TC community has been an incredible resource for helping make our collections more discoverable and accessible. So we look forward to all of your help in this. Over the past few years, we've seen tremendous interest in transcribing the documentation materials related to our annual Smithsonian Folklife Festival. This year, we will be scaling up and adding several thousand pages of handwritten notes taken during our largest festival ever, the 1976 Festival of American Folklife, which took place on the National Mall between June 16th and September 6th, 1976. This 12-week bicentennial event was originally planned as the crescendo to 9 years of successful folklife festivals starting in 1967. More than 5,000 participants took part over the course of the summer and involved the participation of every region of the United States, 38 foreign governments, scores of American Indian tribes, and many labor organizations. An estimated 4.5 million people attended the festival, and we have many thousands of photos and audiovisual recordings taken at this event. Here we see a map which shows where the activities took place, between the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial, just south of the reflecting pool. The 1976 festival featured 7 thematic programs. The African Diaspora program featured different countries every 2 weeks. The festival music stage brought together participants from other program areas, and for the last 4 weeks, its own dedicated performers. Native Americans, Regional America, and Old Ways in the New World changed focus by region or country each week. There was also a program on occupational culture called Working Americans that changed bi-weekly and was finished by a program on transportation in the final month. Next slide, please. Okay, yeah. Each day, visitors encountered a diverse array of cultural traditions as they were presented on the mall. This included everything from performances, narrative discussions, craft and cooking demonstrations, impromptu jam sessions, oral history interviews, and so much more. The festival featured many important cultural groups and performers such as the ensemble Sweet Honey in the Rock, featured here in the top right. Documentation is an important subset of our collections and is often used as primary source materials for research, scholarship, and new creative works. More importantly, they serve as a record that can be used and passed down for future generations, including within the communities and the families that are represented. We have around 3,000 hours of audio recordings from this festival alone, and is the most complete record of the event. When these recordings were made, dedicated volunteers took detailed notes about the events happening in front of them. These log sheets are the main sources of metadata or contextual information for the original tapes. These are rich with things like song titles, performer names, and specific cultural terms that were usually written down off the microphone. Here at the center, we're working hard to preserve the physical documents and tapes from this festival through specialized projects. We recently embarked on an 18-month digitization project for the audio tapes, which will keep this audio content accessible long after the tapes are too far gone. However, our descriptions of the content are very minimal, which is where the log sheets come in. We have a parallel project to scan and upload the audio log sheets to the Transcription Center sometime around this midsummer. These paper records affirm who, what, when, and where things happened at each stage every day. When paired with the recorded audio, these log sheets open up these resources to the broadest audiences possible. We hope that through these projects and the support of the Transcription Center community, we can help provide a platform for the thousands of minds and voices that shared their deep cultural knowledge to audiences over 46 years ago. We also hope to connect former participants and their families to these recordings so that they can be cherished for many generations to come. And so with that, we say thank you for all your hard work and support, and happy transcribing.
Thanks, Dave, for sharing how the festival materials offer a window into practices of creativity and craftsmanship. Art and design are concepts woven throughout Smithsonian collections, from diaries and letters to exhibition records, oral histories, and more. And our volunteers have been working hard at exploring and amplifying the lives of individual artists from the 18th century to present day. Let's hear now from Jess Purkis, Digital Initiatives Archivist at the Archives of American Art, about how the personal stories included in these collections go far beyond art and design.
Thanks, Emily, and hi, everyone. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the materials in our current transcription project campaign, celebrating 175. This year, we're transcribing projects that are related to 175 different people involved with the visual arts in the US and beyond to celebrate the Smithsonian's 175th anniversary. For those of you here today who may have been helping us to transcribe these projects this year, thank you for all you do. Your work is incredible. When I embarked on the 175 campaign, I hoped to launch a range of projects from the materials that we have at the archives from all across the US arts world. I'd hoped it would provide an overview of trends and focus points in US art history for our longtime digital volunteers. And it does. But it's also really highlighted the smaller connections in the art world. By transcribing materials about people scattered across space and time in our collections, you've linked disparate artists, gallery owners, collectors, and arts advocates back together, and you've brought their relationships to life. Sometimes you highlight the more obvious connections between family members or friends. Architect Eero Saarinen, whose papers we hold at the archives, features also in the papers of his first wife, Lillian Swan Saarinen, and his second wife, Aline B. Saarinen, just like you might expect. But his connection to influential interior designer Florence Knoll Bassett is not as prominent. Saarinen's father, Eliel Saarinen, taught Knoll Bassett architectural principles in the 1930s, and she spent summers with the Saarinen family in Europe. When Knoll Bassett donated her papers to the archives, there was a file of letters and drawings by Eero Saarinen, with cartoon skiers and sketches of architecture in Paris jostling on the pages. Knoll Bassett recalled in a 1999 note just how fast Saarinen could draw, using both hands at once, while lecturing on architectural history. Knoll Bassett, interestingly enough, does not feature in Saarinen's papers at all. You also highlight the fleeting, somewhat hidden connections that are buried within larger collections. Take artist Beverly Buchanan's 1980 letter thanking Betty Parsons for her encouragement, which is located in the miscellaneous correspondence in the Betty Parsons papers. Beverly Buchanan was a Black artist born in 1943 who primarily worked in Georgia and the South. Betty Parsons, on the other hand, was an artist and gallery owner born in 1900 who showcased the avant-garde in her New York City gallery. If you only knew the broad strokes of their careers, you might never have known that their paths had crossed in the late 1970s, let alone that Betty Parsons supported Buchanan's work or that Buchanan felt tongue-tied around her. There's only tangential evidence, of course, of this connection in Buchanan's own papers at the archives. There's a photograph of Parsons, quite possibly one of the ones mentioned in this letter. And to highlight the growing connections between galleries and artists, of course. One of the foremost galleries handling contemporary European art during the 20th century was the Jacques Seligman and Company, which you might be familiar with from other Transcription Center projects if you're a long-time digital volunteer. Seligman & Co. held artist Esther G. Rawlich's first solo show. A portion of the correspondence in Rawlich's papers, which are also in the archives, is from Seligman's Teresa D. Parker, and Rawlich's letters to Parker appear in the gallery's general correspondence files. By looking at the transcriptions of the two side by side, you can fill in the gaps to read the growth of Parker and Rawlich's relationship from 1946 to 1952. Letters go from a formal tone in 1946 to short, more informal letters and updates in 1952, when Rawlich ended a letter with a postscript greeting to Parker from Rawlich's dog, Kelly. There are many, many more relationships within the Celebrating 175 campaign. They've become more visible through transcription. We unfortunately don't really have time to talk about them here today. Feel free to check out the Transcription Center and Archives websites to explore some of the others, and maybe transcribe some new upcoming Celebrating 175 projects if you like. Thanks again for all the amazing work that you've all done on the archives materials up to now, and congratulations to everyone on achieving 1 million. And now I'll pass it back to Caitlin.
Sorry about that, everybody. Thank you so much, Jess. And thank you to all of our colleagues for these incredible presentations today. Most importantly, a huge thanks to our incredible digital volunteers for making all of this possible, and to all of you who joined us today to celebrate the path to 1 million transcribed. We can't wait to see what you uncover together next, and invite you to reach out to our team anytime. Happy transcribing. We'll see you again soon.